The old concert hall smelled like polished wood and decades of dreams. 17-year-old Lily Chun sat in the very back row, her white cane resting against her knee as beautiful piano music filled the air around her. Her fingers moved silently. On her lap, following every note that came from the stage below, she had been born without sight, but music had always been her window to the world. Tonight, she was listening to Victor Volkov, one of the most famous pianists alive. He was playing Chopin, and every note seemed to dance through the air like magic. Lily's music teacher, Mrs. Garcia, had saved up for months to buy this ticket. "You need to hear greatness to understand your own gift," she had told Lily just that morning. Mrs. Garcia worked at the community center and didn't make much money, but she believed in Lily more than anyone else in the world. As Victor played the final notes of the piece, the entire hall exploded in applause. Lily clapped too, her heart racing with excitement. She had never heard piano playing like this before. It wasn't just the technical skill that amazed her. It was the way Victor made each note tell a story, the way he could make the piano sing and cry and laugh all at the same time. One day, Lily whispered to herself, "I want to play on that stage." Mrs. Garcia squeezed her hand gently. She had heard those whispered words and smiled. Even though she knew how difficult that dream would be to achieve, after the concert, they walked slowly through the city streets toward the bus stop. Lily's white cane tapped rhythmically on the sidewalk as she navigated around other people heading home from their Saturday night activities. "What did you think?" Mrs. Garcia asked. "It was incredible," Lily said, her voice full of wonder. "The way he played that second movement, I could feel every emotion. It was like he was speaking directly to my heart." Mrs. Garcia nodded, remembering her own younger days when she had dreamed of becoming a professional musician. Life had taken her in a different direction, but through Lily, she felt that dream coming alive again. They lived in a working-class neighborhood where most families struggled to make ends meet. Lily's parents, David and Rosa Chun, had immigrated to America 15 years ago with nothing but hope and determination. They worked 7 days a week running a small grocery store on the corner of Maple Street and Fifth Avenue when Lily was born blind. The doctors had given her parents a long list of things she might never be able to do, but David and Rosa had refused to accept those limitations. They had scraped together every penny they could find to buy an old, upright piano from a family down the street who was moving away. That piano had become the center of Lily's world. Every day after school, she would sit at the worn wooden bench and lose herself in music. She couldn't read sheet music the way other students did, so she learned everything by ear. She would listen to recordings over and over again until she could play them perfectly. Her parents would often stop their work at the store just to listen to her practice. Customers would sometimes pause in the middle of shopping, drawn by the beautiful sounds floating down from the apartment above the store. "She has a gift," Rosa would tell anyone who listened. "Music speaks to her in a way I've never seen before." But gifts alone weren't enough in the classical music world. Lily knew that professional musicians usually started training at expensive schools when they were very young. They had private teachers who charged hundreds of dollars per lesson. They performed in youth orchestras and attended summer camps that cost more than her family made in several months. Lily had none of those advantages. What she had was Mrs. Garcia, who volunteered her time twice a week to help Lily improve her technique. She had her parents who supported her dream even when they didn't fully understand it. And she had something else that couldn't be bought. With money, an extraordinary ability to feel music in her soul. The bus ride home that night was quiet. Mrs. Garcia sat beside Lily, both of them lost in their own thoughts about the incredible performance they had just witnessed. Other passengers got on and off at various stops, but Lily barely noticed. Her mind was still in that concert hall, still feeling the magic of those piano keys under Victor's fingers. "Mrs. Garcia," Lily said softly as they approached their neighborhood, "do you really think I could ever play like that?" Her teacher was quiet for a moment. She had taught music for over 20 years, and she had seen many talented students come and go. But Lily was different. There was something special about the way she connected with music, something that couldn't be taught. In any classroom. "Lily," she said finally, "I've heard you play pieces that made grown adults cry. I've watched you learn complicated songs in half the time it takes other students. You have something that most musicians spend their entire lives trying to find." "But I can't see the sheet music," Lily said, voicing the worry that had been growing in her mind all evening. "I can't watch other pianists play to learn from them. How can I compete with people who have every advantage?" Mrs. Garcia smiled in the darkness of the bus. "Sometimes our biggest challenges become our greatest strengths. You don't just play music, Lily. You live inside it. You feel things that other people miss because they're too busy looking at the notes on the page." When they reached Lily's stop, Mrs. Garcia walked her to the door of the grocery store. The lights were still on inside, and they could see David's stocking shelves while Rosa worked at the cash register, helping the last few customers of the day. "Thank you for tonight," Lily said, giving her teacher a hug. "It was the most beautiful thing I've ever heard." "It won't be the last beautiful thing you hear," Mrs. Garcia replied. "And someday soon, you're going to create beauty like that for other people." Lily climbed the narrow stairs to their apartment above the store, her mind still buzzing with the music she had heard. She could hear her parents closing up the shop below, counting the day's earnings and preparing for another early morning dot in her small bedroom. She sat on her bed and thought about Viktor Volkov's performance. She had memorized every note, every pause, every breath he had taken. But more than that, she had felt the passion behind his playing, the years of dedication and practice that had led to that moment on stage. She knew the road ahead would be difficult. The classical music world was competitive and often unfriendly to people who were different. Many doors would be closed to her simply because she was blind. But sitting there in the darkness that was no different to her than daylight, Lily made a promise to herself. She would not let anything stop her from pursuing her dream. She would practice harder than anyone else. She would find a way to prove that talent and determination mattered more than perfect sight or expensive training. The sounds of the city gradually quieted outside her window, but inside Lily's heart the music played on. Tomorrow she would wake up and practice. She would work on her technique and learn new pieces. She would take one more step toward that distant stage where Viktor Volkov had performed tonight, and maybe, just maybe, she would find a way to make her impossible dream come true. 3 months had passed since that magical night at the concert hall. Lily practiced every single day, sometimes for hours at a time. Her fingers had grown stronger, and her understanding of music had deepened. The old piano in their apartment had become an extension of her soul. One Tuesday morning, Mrs. Garcia called with exciting news. "Lily, there's a master class happening at the Riverside Conservatory this weekend. Viktor Volkov himself is going to teach a few select students in front of an audience." Lily's heart skipped a beat. Viktor Volkov, the same pianist who had mesmerized her that night, would be just a few miles away from her neighborhood. "Can we go?" Lily asked, hardly daring to hope. "Not only can we go," Mrs. Garcia said with a smile in her voice, "but I think you should bring your sheet music." Sometimes these master classes allow audience members to participate. The Riverside Conservatory was unlike anywhere Lily had ever been. As they walked through the main entrance, her feet clicked on marble floors instead of worn linoleum. The walls seemed to echo with decades of classical music, and she could smell the expensive wood polish that kept everything gleaming. Mrs. Garcia described the building as they walked. "There are oil paintings of famous composers lining the hallways. The ceilings are incredibly high, with crystal chandeliers hanging down, and the students here, they look like they've never worried about money a day in their lives." Lily could hear the difference in how people spoke here. Their voices carried confidence and privilege. Many of them discussed their private lessons with world-renowned teachers, their upcoming auditions for prestigious competitions, and their summer programs in Vienna and Paris. "I don't belong here," Lily whispered to Mrs. Garcia as they found seats in the back of the performance hall. "Don't say that," her teacher replied firmly. "Talent belongs everywhere." Music doesn't care about your bank account or your address. The performance hall itself was breathtaking. Mrs. Garcia described the red velvet seats, the gold trim along the walls, and the magnificent grand piano sitting in the center of the stage like a black jewel. About 60 people filled the audience, most of them well-dressed music students and their equally well-dressed parents. When Viktor Volkov walked onto the stage, the room fell completely silent. Lily remembered his playing from that night 3 months ago, but hearing him speak was different. His voice carried authority and, she had to admit, a touch of arrogance. "Today, we will explore the deeper meanings behind the music you think you know," Viktor announced to the audience. "Too many young musicians today play the notes without understanding the soul behind them." He worked with 3 conservatory students over the next hour. Each one played beautifully, but Viktor's critiques were harsh and detailed. He stopped them frequently, demonstrating how they should phrase certain passages or how their emotional interpretation was lacking. "Music is not just about technical perfection," he told one nervous student. "It's about seeing the composer's vision and bringing it to life. You must have the ability to truly see what the music is trying to express." Lily felt her stomach tighten at those words. See, everything in this world seemed to come back to seeing after the 3rd student finished. Viktor looked out at the audience. "Does anyone else wish to play today? We have a few minutes remaining." The room was quiet. These were mostly observers, not performers ready to play in front of a master like Viktor Vol. Kov. Mrs. Garcia gently touched Lily's arm. "This is your chance," she whispered. "You've been preparing for something like this your whole life." Lily's mouth went dry. Her hands began to shake slightly. All these well-trained students with their expensive clothes and perfect technique, and here she was, a girl from above a grocery store who had learned everything by ear. "I can't," she whispered back. "Look at everyone here. They're all SO. They're all so afraid to try," Mrs. Garcia interrupted. "But you're not afraid of music, Lily. You never have been." Before she could change her mind, Mrs. Garcia stood up. "We have a student here who would love to play," she called out. Every head in the room turned toward them. Lily felt her face burn with embarrassment as dozens of eyes focused on her. She heard whispers starting around the room. "Is that girl blind?" someone murmured. "What's she doing here?" asked another voice. Viktor looked in their direction with barely concealed impatience. This was clearly not what he had expected. "Very well," he said. "Please come forward." The walk to the stage felt like the longest journey of Lily's life. She used her white cane to navigate between the rows of seats, acutely aware that everyone was watching her every step. Some people moved their feet out of the way, while others just stared. When she reached the stage, she had to use her cane to find the steps leading up to the piano. The room was so quiet she could hear her own breathing. "What is your name, young lady?" Viktor asked, his tone suggesting he wanted to get this over with quickly. "Lily Chun," she replied, her voice barely above a whisper. "And what will you be playing for us today, Miss Chun?" Lily took a deep breath. She had been practicing Rachmaninoff's Piano Concerto No. 2 for months. It was one of the most challenging pieces in the classical piano repertoire, requiring not just technical skill but deep emotional understanding. "Rachmaninoff's Piano Concerto No. 2, she said, trying to make her voice stronger. A few people in the audience actually laughed. Not mean laughter, but the kind of nervous giggling that happens when someone says something unexpected. Viktor's eyebrows shot up. "Miss Chun," he said, and now his voice carried obvious condescension. "That is one of the most demanding pieces in the classical repertoire. Perhaps something more ... suitable to your level would be appropriate. Maybe a simple Mozart sonata or a Chopin waltz?" The suggestion stung, but what hurt even more was the way he said it, as if he had already decided what she was capable of based on how she looked, not on what she could do. "I understand it's challenging," Lily said, her voice growing steadier, "but I've been preparing this piece for months. I'd really like to try." Viktor turned slightly toward the audience and made a subtle gesture with his hands, as if to say, "Well, we'll humor her for a moment." Several people in the audience shifted uncomfortably in their seats. "Miss Chun," Victor continued, his voice taking on an almost patronizing tone, "this piece requires not just technical precision, but the ability to truly see the music, to understand the visual imagery that Rachmaninoff was painting with his notes. It demands a kind of musical vision that. He paused, clearly struggling with how to phrase his next words without being directly cruel. "Got blind people can't have?" Lily finished for him, her voice now carrying an edge of steel that surprised everyone in the room, including herself. Victor's face flushed slightly. "I didn't say that." "You didn't have to," Lily replied. She turned toward the piano, using her hands to locate the bench and adjust it to the right height. "With respect, Mr. Volkov, maybe there's more than one way to see music." The room fell completely silent. No one had expected this quiet girl to stand up to the famous pianist. Victor himself seemed momentarily at a loss for words. Finally, he stepped back and made a sweeping gesture toward the piano. "Very well, Miss Chun, please enlighten us." The sarcasm in his voice was unmistakable. He clearly expected her to struggle through a few measures before stopping in embarrassment. Some people in the audience were already pulling out their phones, perhaps expecting to record what they assumed would be an awkward moment. Lily sat at the bench and placed her hands above the keys. She could feel the weight of everyone's expectations, their doubt, their pity, and in some cases their cruel curiosity. But as her fingers touched the piano keys, all of that faded away. This was her moment. Everything she had learned, every hour she had practiced, every dream she had harbored about performing on a stage like this, had led to this single moment. She took one last deep breath, closed her eyes, and began to play. The first notes that came from the piano were so soft, so gentle, that some people in the audience leaned forward to make sure they were hearing correctly. Lily's fingers moved across the keys like she was caressing the music itself, coaxing each note to life with incredible tenderness. The opening of Rachmaninoff's Piano Concerto No. 2 is deceptively simple. Just a few quiet chords that seem to whisper rather than sing, but the way Lily played those opening measures made everyone in the room hold their breath. There was something different about her touch, something that spoke directly to the heart. Victor, who had been standing with his arms crossed and a skeptical expression on his face, felt his posture slowly change. The smirk that had been playing at the corners of his mouth began to fade as he realized that this wasn't going to be the embarrassing display he had expected. Lily's hands moved with absolute confidence across the keyboard. She knew exactly where every key was located, not because she could see them, but because the piano had become part of her body over years of practice. Her fingers found each note with precision that would have impressed even the most demanding teacher. But technical skill wasn't what made the room go completely silent. It was the emotion that poured out of every single note she played. Where other pianists might focus on showing off their speed or their ability to play the loudest passages, Lily seemed to understand that this piece was about something much deeper. As she moved into the more complex sections of the concerto, her entire body became part of the performance. She swayed slightly with the rhythm, her face showing the joy and pain and longing that Rachmaninoff had built into his masterpiece more than a century ago. Mrs. Garcia, still sitting in the back row, felt tears starting to form in her eyes. She had heard Lily practice this piece hundreds of times in their community center's small practice room. But this was different. This was Lily not just playing the music, but becoming the music. The other audience members were experiencing something they had never felt before in all their years of attending classical performances. Usually they listened to music with their minds, analyzing technique and comparing performances to recordings they knew. But Lily's playing bypassed their analytical thinking entirely and went straight to their emotions. A middle-aged woman in the third row found herself thinking about her late mother, who used to play piano lullabies when she was a child. A teenage boy who had been scrolling through his phone put the device away completely, drawn into the story that Lily was telling through her music. Even the conservatory students, who had grown up around professional-level playing, were shocked into silence. They had spent years learning to play with technical perfection, but most of them had never heard someone play with this level of emotional truth. Victor himself was going through a transformation as he listened. As one of the world's most celebrated pianists, he had heard this concerto performed by orchestras and soloists in the greatest concert halls on earth. He had played it himself countless times. But standing there listening to this 17-year-old girl, he was hearing things in the music that he had never noticed before. The way she handled the transition into the famous melodic theme made his hands actually tremble. She didn't just play the melody, she made it breathe. Each phrase seemed to tell a story, and each story connected to the next one in a way that revealed the deeper structure of Rachmaninoff's composition. How is she doing this? He thought to himself. She's not even looking at sheet music. She's playing this entire complex piece from memory, and she's finding musical ideas that I've been missing for 30 years. As Lily continued playing, something magical began to happen in the room. The artificial barriers that usually existed in places like the conservatory started to dissolve. It didn't matter anymore who had expensive clothes or famous teachers, or trust funds. It didn't matter who could see and who couldn't. The only thing that mattered was the music, and the music was absolutely extraordinary. The technical passages that had intimidated so many other pianists flowed from Lily's fingers like water. Her left hand provided a foundation that was both powerful and subtle, while her right hand sang the melodies with a clarity that made every note seem important. She played the fast sections with incredible speed, but never at the expense of musical meaning. When she reached the climactic moments of the piece, Lily's playing took on an intensity that filled the entire hall. Her whole body was engaged now, her shoulders and arms moving in perfect coordination to create sounds that seemed impossible from a single piano. The audience was completely transfixed. Some people had stopped breathing entirely, afraid that any sound might break the spell that Lily was weaving. Others found themselves crying without knowing why, overwhelmed by emotions they couldn't name. Victor realized that his mouth was hanging open, and he consciously closed it. Everything he thought he knew about music, about talent, about what it meant to be a real artist, was being challenged by this teenager who had walked up to the piano with a white cane. She's not playing the piano, he thought to himself. She's speaking through it. Every note is a word, every phrase is a sentence, and together they're telling a story that's more beautiful than anything I've ever heard. As Lily moved through the different sections of the concerto, she seemed to be painting pictures with sound. During the quiet, reflective passages, the audience could almost see moonlight on water. During the passionate sections, they felt like they were witnessing a great love story. During the dramatic climaxes, they experienced the full range of human emotion compressed into pure, musical expression. The most remarkable thing was how natural it all seemed. Lily wasn't showing off or trying to impress anyone. She was simply sharing something that lived deep inside her soul, and that sharing was one of the most generous gifts anyone in that room had ever received. Mrs. Garcia looked around and saw that she wasn't the only one crying. A distinguished-looking man in an expensive suit was wiping his eyes with a handkerchief. A group of teenage conservatory students were staring at Lily with expressions of pure wonder. Even the usually stoic Victor was visibly moved, his professional composure completely abandoned. As Lily approached the final section of the piece, she seemed to dig even deeper into the emotional core of the music. Her playing became more intimate, more personal, as if she was sharing her deepest secrets with everyone in the room. The notes seemed to hang in the air longer, each one precious and irreplaceable. The technical demands of the ending passages were enormous, but Lily met them with an ease that made them seem effortless. Her fingers flew across the keyboard in cascades of notes that sparkled like diamonds, building to a conclusion that would bring this incredible journey to its proper end. But even as the piece neared its completion, nobody in the audience wanted it to end. They had been transported to a place where music wasn't just entertainment or even art, but something closer to prayer. They had witnessed something that would change how they thought about music for the rest of their lives. In those final moments before the last notes would ring out, Victor realized that he had just witnessed something that happens maybe once in a generation. He had heard a young artist discover her true voice and share it with the world, and that voice was unlike anything he had ever experienced before. The final notes of Rachmaninoff's concerto hung in the air like golden threads, slowly fading into a silence so complete that it felt sacred. Lily's hands remained poised above the keys for a moment, her chest rising and falling as she caught her breath from the emotional journey she had just taken everyone on. For what felt like an eternity, nobody moved. Nobody spoke. Nobody even seemed to breathe. The silence stretched on for 10 seconds, then 20, then 30. In most concert halls, this would have been awkward. But in this moment, the silence felt necessary, like everyone needed time to process what they had just experienced. Victor stood frozen in place, his mouth slightly open, staring at this 17-year-old girl who had just turned his understanding of music completely upside down. His hands were shaking slightly, and he found himself struggling to form coherent thoughts. Then, like a dam bursting, the spell broke. Someone in the middle of the audience started clapping. Not the polite, measured applause that usually followed conservatory performances, but urgent, desperate clapping, as if they needed to express something that words couldn't capture. Within seconds, that single person's applause became 2, then 5, then 10, then everyone in the room was on their feet, applauding with an intensity that made the walls seem to vibrate. But this wasn't just applause. People were shouting, "Bravo!" and "Incredible!" Some were openly sobbing while they clapped. The distinguished man in the expensive suit was applauding so hard that his hands were turning red. The group of teenage students were jumping up and down, their usual cool composure completely abandoned. Mrs. Garcia was crying so hard she could barely see, but she was clapping louder than anyone else in the room. This was her student, her Lily, receiving the recognition she had always deserved. The applause went on and on. 2 minutes became 3, then 4, then 5. People seemed afraid to stop, as if ending the applause might somehow diminish what they had just witnessed. Lily sat at the piano bench, overwhelmed by the response. She had never heard applause like this before. She could feel the emotion in the room, the way people were pouring their hearts out through their clapping hands. Tears were streaming down her face, but she was smiling the biggest smile of her life. Several people in the audience had pulled out their phones during the performance, and now they were frantically typing messages and sharing videos. Within minutes, clips of Lily's performance were being posted on social media with captions like, "This will change everything you thought you knew about music, and I've never heard anything like this in my life." But the most dramatic transformation was happening to Victor himself. As the applause continued, he felt something breaking apart inside his chest. All the arrogance, all the prejudice, all the assumptions he had made about this young girl were crumbling like a house built on sand. He had spent his entire career believing that he understood music better than almost anyone alive. He had won international competitions, performed with the world's greatest orchestras, and taught at the most prestigious conservatories. But standing there listening to Lily play, he realized that he had been missing something fundamental about what music could be. When the applause finally began to die down, Victor slowly walked toward the piano. His legs felt unsteady and his usual confident stride was gone. Everyone in the room watched as he approached Lily, wondering what the famous pianist would say. "Miss Chun," he began, and his voice was completely different from the condescending tone he had used earlier. Now it was soft, almost reverent. "I owe you an apology." Lily turned toward his voice, still trying to process everything that had just happened. "What you just played?" Victor continued, and his voice cracked slightly with emotion. "I have performed that piece hundreds of times. I have heard it played by some of the greatest pianists in history, but I have never, ever heard it like that." The room was quiet again, but this was a different kind of silence. Everyone was hanging on every word. "You didn't just play Rachmaninoff's notes," Victor said, and now tears were visible in his eyes. "You found his soul. You revealed things in that music that I didn't even know existed, and I've been studying it for 30 years. He paused, struggling. to find the right words for what he was feeling. When I was your age, I thought music was about perfection, about playing every note exactly right, about technical mastery, about impressing audiences with my skill. I spent decades climbing to the top of the classical music world, and I thought I had achieved everything there was to achieve. Victor looked around the room at all the faces staring back at him, then returned his attention to Lily. But you just showed me that I've been missing the most important thing. Music isn't about perfection. It's about truth. It's about connecting with something deeper than technique or training or talent. It's about sharing a piece of your soul with other people. Several people in the audience were crying now, moved not just by what they had heard, but by the humility and honesty in Victor's words. I said earlier that you needed to be able to see the music, Victor continued, his voice growing stronger. I was wrong. You don't see the music, Miss Chun. You are the music. Your blindness isn't a limitation, it's your greatest gift. You hear things that the rest of us miss because we're too busy looking at sheet music and worrying about what other people think. He knelt down beside the piano bench so that he was at eye level with Lily. I have contacts at every major orchestra, every important conservatory, every record label that matters. I want to help you share this gift with the world. If you'll let me, I'd like to be your advocate, your supporter, whatever you need. Lily was overwhelmed. This was the same man who had mocked her just an hour ago, who had suggested she play something more suitable to her level. Now he was offering to help launch her career. Mr. Volkov, she said softly, I just want to play music. I want to share what I feel when I sit at a piano. If you can help me do that, then yes, I would be honored to work with you. Victor smiled, and it was the first genuine smile anyone in the room had seen from him all day. The honor would be mine, Miss Chun, completely mine. As if on cue, people in the audience started applauding again. But this was different from the earlier standing ovation. This was appreciation not just for an incredible performance, but for a moment of genuine human connection, for watching someone's prejudices dissolve in the face of undeniable truth. Mrs. Garcia made her way through the crowd to reach Lily. When she got to the stage, she hugged her student tightly. I'm so proud of you, she whispered. Not just for how you played, but for how you handled everything. You showed grace under pressure, and you never let anyone make you feel small. By now, people were starting to gather around Lily, wanting to introduce themselves, to tell her how her performance had affected them, to be close to someone who had just created something magical. The conservatory director, who had been watching from the side of the room, approached Victor. In 40 years of running this institution, he said quietly, I have never seen anything like what just happened here. This young woman has a gift that comes along once in a generation. Victor nodded, still trying to process his own transformation. She's going to change everything, he said. The way we think about music, about talent, about what's possible. She's going to inspire a whole generation of musicians to dig deeper, to be more honest, to remember why they fell in love with music in the first place. As the crowd began to slowly disperse, people were already making phone calls, sending messages, sharing videos. Word was spreading fast about what had happened in that conservatory that afternoon. But for Lily, sitting at that piano bench with tears of joy still on her cheeks, the most important thing wasn't the applause or the recognition or even Victor's offer to help her career. The most important thing was that she had finally found her voice, and the world had listened. 6 months later, Lily stood backstage at Carnegie Hall, her heart pounding with excitement and nerves. The most famous concert hall in America was just beyond the heavy curtain, filled with 2,000 people waiting to hear her play with the New York Philharmonic Orchestra. She could hear the orchestra tuning their instruments, the familiar chaos of violins finding their pitch, the deep rumble of cellos, the bright calls of trumpets. But tonight felt different from every other performance she had ever given. Tonight wasn't just about her anymore. Mrs. Garcia stood beside her, still hardly believing that her former community center student was about to make her Carnegie Hall debut. How are you feeling? She asked, adjusting Lily's black concert dress. Scared and excited and grateful all At the same time, Lily replied, her voice steady despite her racing pulse. I keep thinking about that day at the conservatory. If you hadn't encouraged me to play, none of this would be happening. Oh, it would have happened, Mrs. Garcia said with a smile. Maybe not exactly like this, but your talent was always going to find a way to shine. Some lights are too bright to stay hidden. Viktor Volkov walked over to join them. In the months since that transformative day at the conservatory, he had become more than just Lily's advocate. He had become a true mentor and friend, using all his connections and influence to open doors that had been closed to musicians like her. The audience is buzzing with anticipation, he told Lily. I've never seen Carnegie Hall this excited before a performance. There are music critics here from every major publication, representatives from record labels and musicians who traveled from other countries just to hear you play. But Victor's own transformation had been just as remarkable as Lily's rise to fame. The arrogant, dismissive pianist who had mocked a blind teenager had evolved into someone who used his platform to advocate for musicians from all backgrounds. He had started a scholarship program for students from low-income families and had begun speaking publicly about the prejudices that existed in classical music. How different do you feel now compared to 6 months ago? Lily asked him. Victor was quiet for a moment, considering the question seriously. 6 months ago, I thought I knew everything about music. I thought success meant playing faster, louder, more perfectly than anyone else. I thought the purpose of music was to impress people with my skill. He paused, watching the orchestra through a gap in the curtain. But you taught me that music isn't about showing off. It's about sharing something real with other people. It's about being vulnerable and honest and human. You made me remember why I fell in love with piano in the first place, when I was a little boy playing my grandmother's old upright. Meanwhile, in the audience, Lily's parents sat in the front row, still amazed by how much their lives had changed. David and Rosa Chun had closed their grocery store early tonight, something they had never done before, to watch their daughter perform with one of the world's most prestigious orchestras. Do you remember when the doctor told us all the things she wouldn't be able to do? Rosa whispered to her husband. David smiled, tears already forming in his eyes. I remember thinking we would spend our lives protecting her from a world that wouldn't understand her. I never imagined that she would change the world instead. The months following Lily's performance at the conservatory had been like a whirlwind. The video of her playing had gone viral within days, accumulating millions of views and thousands of comments from people around the world who were moved by her story and her music. Record labels had started calling within a week. Concert halls that had never heard of her suddenly wanted to book her performances. Music schools that would never have considered accepting a blind student from a working class family were now offering her full scholarships. But perhaps more importantly, Lily's story had inspired thousands of other young musicians who had felt excluded from the classical music world. Letters poured in from students with disabilities, kids from poor families, and anyone who had ever been told they didn't belong in certain spaces. A young violinist with autism wrote to tell Lily that her story had given him the courage to audition for his school orchestra. A pianist who used a wheelchair said that seeing Lily succeed had inspired her to apply to conservatory. Dozens of music teachers shared stories of students who had been motivated by Lily's example to pursue their dreams despite obstacles. The classical music world itself was changing too. Conservatories began implementing more inclusive admission practices. Orchestra auditions started focusing more on musical ability and less on traditional credentials. Music critics began writing about the need for diversity and representation in classical music. Tonight's performance at Carnegie Hall represented the culmination of all these changes. But for Lily, standing backstage with the people who had supported her journey, it felt more like a beginning than an ending. 5 minutes until we start, the stage manager announced. Victor placed a gentle hand on Lily's shoulder. Remember, you don't need to prove anything to anyone tonight. You've already done that. Tonight is about sharing the gift that you've always had. Just be yourself and let the music speak. Lily nodded, feeling the same calm confidence that had carried her through that first performance at the conservatory. She had learned so much in the past 6 months about the music industry, about fame, about the pressures that came with success, but at its core, nothing had really changed. She was still the same girl who loved to sit at a piano and let music flow through her fingers. As she walked toward the stage, her white cane tapping softly against the floor, Lily thought about all the young musicians who might be watching tonight, especially those who felt like they didn't fit into the traditional mold of classical music. The orchestra fell silent as she made her way to the piano. The audience's applause was warm and welcoming, but she could sense their anticipation, their curiosity about whether this young woman could live up to all the excitement that had surrounded her story. She sat at the bench and adjusted it to the perfect height, just as she had done thousands of times before in her family's apartment above the grocery store. The Steinway grand piano beneath her fingers was worth more than her family had ever owned, but it was still just 88 keys waiting to be brought to life. The conductor raised his baton, and the orchestra prepared to begin. But before the first note sounded, Lily thought about Mrs. Garcia, sitting in the audience with tears already in her eyes. She thought about her parents who had worked so hard to give her opportunities they had never had. She thought about Victor, who had learned to see past his own prejudices. And she thought about all the young dreamers who needed to know that their dreams were possible. As the opening notes of Rachmaninoff's Piano Concerto No. 2 began to fill Carnegie Hall, Lily realized that this performance wasn't really about her at all. It was about proving that talent comes from everywhere, that barriers exist to be broken, and that music belongs to everyone who has the courage to pursue it. Her fingers found the keys with the same confidence and emotion that had captivated that first audience at the conservatory. But now her music carried something additional, the weight of possibility, the power of representation, and the knowledge that somewhere in the audience or watching online, a young musician who had been told they didn't belong was seeing that anything was possible. The music soared through the concert hall, carrying with it not just beautiful sounds, but a message of hope that would inspire countless others to pursue their own impossible dreams. And in that moment, Lily Chun wasn't just a pianist anymore. She was proof that the world was changing, one note at a time,